Today's lecture is going to be tactical resolutions versus psychological resolutions. All right, let's get a quick overview of the topic right quick. Let's go over tactical resolution first. So let's discuss the term resolution before I get into it. So originally I was going to call the lecture tactical victory versus psychological victory, but there's several ways conflicts can resolve. Sometimes you lose, sometimes there's a draw, sometimes there's interruptions, and this principle can apply to non-combat. You know, maybe you're in a chess tournament, video game tournament, whatever it is, right? So a resolution is how a competitive interaction ends. Okay. So a resolution that is a result of preparation and execution. I don't remember if you were there for the 3 Rings of Combat lecture, but I talked about what preparation is, right? It's a catch-all term for being in shape, what equipment you have, you know, what training you have, etc. And then, of course, execution, right? You've got the tools, but what decisions do you make with those tools, right? And that affects the outcome. So this is a scenario where your victory is only based off of, you know, your preparation and your execution and not any psychological factors, which leads to the point, it's a never occurring condition. So basically, when you're dealing with, let's say, 2 animals or 2 humans, there's never going to be a point where, you know, the psychology factor is not a factor. It's always a factor. Even if you are fighting with somebody and there's no retreat, no surrender, no doubt, anything like that, right? There's still different temperaments that are going to affect the outcome, right? If you're super angry and you spend your energy really fast, that's going to affect the tactical outcome. So the only time you're going to have a pure tactical resolution is if like 2 robots are fighting each other, right? So this is more theoretical to separate the two, and I'll explain why later. Now let's talk about psychological resolutions. So a resolution that is a result of willpower absence or manipulation. So an example of willpower absence is you're not attacking somebody because there's no reason to, right? That's the number one reason people don't attack each other. But then willpower manipulation is, like I said, you and me are friends, but let's say you attack my brother, right? Now that's manipulating me and giving me the willpower to attack you. Right? Or I want to attack you, but then you pull out a gun. Now that's deterring me. Now that's manipulating me to no longer want to attack you anymore. This is an always occurring condition. So an example of that is right now we're enjoying a moment of peace. We're not attacking each other. Nobody's kicking down the doors trying to attack us. Right? That's a function of psychological resolution. The people outside are allowing us to enjoy peace because there's no reason to attack us, or we're just too scary to be messed with, and you know, vice versa, right? We're enjoying a moment of peace with each other because there's no reason for us to attack each other. So any moment of peace you enjoy, anytime you walk by somebody, anytime you drive by somebody on the freeway and they don't attack you or don't try to run you off the road, that's all a function of psychological resolution, basically. Or is sometimes, even if somebody wants to attack you, most of the time they won't. So let's break down tactical resolution. This isn't going to be very long. Like I said, preparation is something I talk about in another lecture, the 3 Rings of Combat. You can check it out on YouTube. And then, of course, like I said before, execution is pretty straightforward, you know, what you choose to do with the tools. But there's 2 important factors I want to cover. Okay. It is rare but necessary for freedom. So I covered that in another lecture before when I talk about the difference between freedom and privilege, right? If you're willing to fight for something physically to the death, it's a freedom. If you're not, it's a privilege that you enjoy until somebody's willing to push you far enough to fight for it. So a majority of the time you can get away with psychological resolutions. You can talk things out. You can deter people. You can, you know, bargain with them. You can get pretty far in life purely off psychological resolutions. But every once in a while you run into someone or something that is not willing to budge, and you're going to have to fight it out for them if you're fighting for freedom. So it's just a good kind of thing to keep in your mind that if you're passionate about something, you kind of have to think, would I actually, you know, fight somebody physically over this? And you know, whether or not it is, it's just kind of an idea of how much of my energy should I put into this if I'm not willing to, you know, really actually fight over it. And of course, it's a key component in psychological resolution. I know I'm here to kind of talk about the two and why it's important to recognize the two different ones and what degree of the resolution is psychological versus tactical. But let's not pretend that being capable of tactical resolution is not a factor in psychological resolution, right? If people know you're a bad motherfucker, they tend to stay away from you, and it helps your ability to deter and reason with people. So it is a major factor in psychological resolutions, even though we're talking about them separately. So let's break down psychological resolution. There's going to be quite a bit to unpack here. So let's talk about the neutral psychological temperament, right? We talked about that, I think, a little bit, right? How you would behave to a complete stranger you know nothing about. Okay, so I'm going to look at it from an economic standpoint. There's morality, there's ways you were raised, there's emotional, disposition against or for attacking. Those are all variables. They're not only person to person, but incident to incident. Somebody may fight you in a different way if they're angry versus not angry. So those are, if you're going to get in a fight with somebody you don't know, that's not really something you can predict. Right, it's going to vary person to person. But one thing, especially the most psychopathic and non-empathetic of us, or anywhere on the spectrum, everybody kind of has a sense of economics, right? Not just in money, but just food. We all understand that we need to eat, we need to drink water, we need to factor that in. So from an economic standpoint, just purely looking at that factor, what would our neutral psychological temperament be towards each other? I would say mostly neutral and slightly positive for one reason. So mostly neutral, slightly positive. If you meet a random person and let's say a 0, right, you want to be their best friend no matter what, and you basically want to marry them on the spot, versus 100, you want to kill them on the spot, I'd say we sit around 40, 45 range. And for the one reason would be potential usefulness. Anytime you meet a brand new person, you know nothing about them, maybe in the future they might be useful to you. They might be a friend one day, they may be an ally one day, they may procreate and create somebody who's an ally, or they may introduce you to somebody else. So anytime you meet a stranger, there's always a chance that they could be potentially useful to you, and that would be the number one reason why you wouldn't attack them just on sight. So that'd be your neutral psychological temperament. And again, this is the major factor in willpower absence for an attack, right? Brand new stranger walks in, they probably could be potentially useful to us or our families one day, so we're not just going to randomly attack them for no reason, because that would get rid of that potential usefulness. So let's talk about willpower manipulation. Now I'm going to cover incentive this time, right? So again, we talked about I don't want to attack you, but now you've done something to change my mind to make me want to attack you. And I'm going to sum this up basically in threats, and I'm going to sum it up into 3 types of threats. Okay, so the first one are mental threats. Not commencing an attack presents a perceived threat to your direct or indirect, friends, family, community, what have you. Emotional and mental well-being. Right? Disrespect, anger, humiliation, right? Random person walks through the door, I say hi to him and he says, fuck you, N-word. Okay, right, now he's threatening me, now he's, disrespecting me, that's filling me with negative emotions. Again, I might attack them to stop them from doing that again, right? Because if there's no consequence to the action, then there's no incentive for them to stop. There's no deterrence, right? So that's, an example of, a mental threat, right? You're messing with my mental health or somebody around me. Okay, and then of course there's physical threats. Not commencing an attack presents a perceived direct or indirect threat to physical well-being, etc., right? Assault, whatever, right? They threaten me with violence, or let's say they slap me. I don't really take any damage, right? But if I don't present the consequence and I don't attack them, what stops them from doing it again? What's going to deter the abuse from continuing, right? No. And then the last one is going to be economic threats. Not commencing an attack presents a perceived direct or indirect threat to economic well-being, right? Not just money, but again, food, shelter, all the things we need, right? Meet just a random person, and then they just walk in and steal the chips. right? May seem crazy to attack them over that, right? But again, right, if I don't stop that incentive, what stops them from stealing the computer next time, or you know what I mean, taking my shelter? So now we're going to talk about willpower manipulation. So let's talk about deterrence this time. Okay, so we can just sum this up as inverted threats. And what I mean by that is it prevents an attack because the mental, physical, or economic consequences of commencing the attack are perceived as worse than not commencing the attack. Right? The incentive may be up here, but the deterrence is worse, right? Again, we go back to the mental one, right? Somebody walks in and calls me the N-word or wants to attack me. Well, if they did that, right, they'd get canceled. Nobody would want to be their friends. Or if you slap a woman, right, nobody respects you anymore. Nobody wants to be your friends. People talk bad about you, right? That's a mental threat. And then, of course, physical threats. You slap a woman, somebody might jump you, beat the crap out of you, throw you in jail, put you in a box for 8 years. And then, of course, right, economic, right? You may lose your job. Nobody wants to trade with you anymore. People steal your food. Right, so that's the deterrence, is even if you think you can take the person, right, are the consequences worth it, right? If that deterrence threshold is higher than the incentive threshold, the attack won't occur or will stop. So let's get a quick psychological overview. So attacks occur and continue when two conditions are met. I just covered that a second ago. Right, the incentive crosses the neutral absence threshold, so the threat you present to me is greater than the potential usefulness you may serve one day, and then of course it surpasses the deterrence threshold. Right, I think I can take you, and I think that the outcome of attacking you is a better outcome than not attacking you. And of course I use the word continue too. Right, you're attacking me, you're beating me up, and then I pull out a knife. Now I've escalated the force. Now, right, the incentive may no longer, surpass the deterrence, and you're probably going to run away or get out of there. Right. So I use the example of mass shootings. We talked about that a little bit earlier. Usually that's when somebody's mental state is so far gone that they completely lose this. That neutral absence threshold. Right? The people at the school or whatever event, the potential usefulness they may have is no longer a factor, so they view them as disposable. And then, of course, right, that deterrence threshold, they no longer fear the deterrence. They no longer fear getting killed. They no longer fear going to jail. So these two things don't mean anything to them. And then, of course, there's an incentive for whatever reasoning they may have, and then the attack occurs. Going to attack this remote if it doesn't start working. Another thing to realize is that all threats are perceived, right? Is sometimes somebody may have threatening intentions and you don't really see it and you underplay the threat. A lot of people here in Davis do that. Sometimes you overplay the threat, right? You overestimate that somebody is threatening you. Like if you were raised to be racist and somebody of a ethnic background that you've been taught to fear walks in, you don't actually have any real information on that person, but because you perceive that the threat they present is greater than the possible usefulness they can present, now you have an immediate hostility towards them based on no actual evidence, right? Direct evidence that you have. So it's just a good idea to remember that all threats are perceived, our guts are not always right, and you always have to kind of have that conscious awareness of what you're perceiving as a threat and understand it's not foolproof. Okay, finally. So let's get to the overview and takeaway of the lecture. Understanding the difference between psychological and tactical resolutions is key for accurate conceptual awareness and proper preparation. So conceptual awareness and preparation are terms I used in that 3 Rings of Combat lecture. But to crash course it, right, is after you get in a fight or after you get into a conflict, right, the first thing you do is you go back to situational awareness. You don't want to get attacked a second time. Then from there you go into preparedness, right? You see what health and resources you have left in case you have to engage again. And then once it's all done, it goes back into your conceptual awareness, which is your understanding of a potential threat, right? So an example is if you've never fought a bear before, you have no conceptual awareness of what a bear can do. But Once you've read up on a bear or you've been in that fight, now you understand, oh, okay, I understand how that works. So the whole point of separating the two things is to understand, if you win a fight or lose a fight, right, how much of it was psychological, how much of it was tactical, right? It's important to understand the two. So the example I'm going to use is, I fought a dude at a 7-Eleven, I think, a year and a half ago. It was a while ago, right? Completely demolished him. Wasn't even a fair fight. Didn't even get hit. Now, if I was a charlatan, I would say, oh yeah, that was a pure tactical resolution. My superior training and fitness and all that was a factor. But the reality is, he didn't want to fight me. Right? He didn't want to fight me. But again, we talk about those deterrents and incentives, right? He threw up a gang sign before we fought, so I assume he grew up in a rough gang neighborhood. In those neighborhoods, even if you lose a fight, right, that's better for your long term than not fighting at all, right? Because if you show that you're scared to fight, then we talk about all those threats. Then that's a green light, right? People can disrespect you, people can rob you, people can beat you up, right? If you show that you're afraid to fight, it opens the door for all those threats. So even though he didn't want to fight me and he was scared to fight me, he was more scared of looking like he was afraid to fight me. So he postured more but didn't really try. But even if he tried as hard as he could, I still would have won, probably pretty easily, but it would have been different, right? And so I have to have that wherewithal. Yeah, my training and all that was a factor, but it was an easy fight because he didn't go 100%. Right, and so if I have that kind of false image of, oh, I'm hot shit and I'm just this tactical genius, I'm going to overestimate my ability, and then when I fight somebody who's not afraid to fight me, then I'm going to end up, right, I'm going to get cocky, I'm not going to train enough, whatever, right? So this will happen with UFC fighters. Some of them will, go in, have a bad performance just because they suck, but they think, it was psychological. I didn't sleep right before the fight, and this and that and the other, and so they don't address their hole in their tactical game, and they go off and lose more, right? Because they, play it off as psychological, or vice versa. Let's say you're doing fine in a fight, but let's say you get an adrenaline dump in the first round, right? You're just too emotional and you get tired too quickly, and if you think it's a tactical thing, you may train your striking and grappling, but maybe you don't train your conditioning or your psychological side, so the problem continues. So the point of this lecture is it's very important to understand that after a resolution, win, loss, draw, whatever, what factor, how much of it was psychological and how much of it was tactical? How much of it was lack of preparation? If you lose, right, how much of it was lack of preparation or bad decision making versus how much of it was you were scared, you hesitated, vice versa. So it's important to separate the two so that you can accurately break down the conflict so that you can have better knowledge going forward, right? So you actively know how much of it was psychological and how much of it was tactical, so you make the right assessment.